Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 13. Chapter 13, we're going to be doing this in two parts. This chapter is a relatively easier chapter compared to the last one. We dealt with neurophysiology. Physiology of a neuron can be a little bit more complicated. We're going to look mostly at the anatomy and some stuff of the spinal cord, and then we'll look at the spinal nerves. This one, we're going to really focus on spinal cord. Next one, we'll do spinal nerves and talk about reflexes and all that good stuff. So just want to remind you guys that today I will do what others won't. So tomorrow I can do what others can't. You are doing what many people won't do. Study anatomy and physiology, go into a healthcare program. They can't do that. Not everybody will be sitting here and studying these courses, getting through it, and then go on to do a healthcare program, be a nurse, be a healthcare provider of some type. You guys are doing that. So congratulations. Keep going. Don't give up. Okay, let's see it. So these, of course, the things I'm going to be asking. So the reflex arc comes later in the chapter, not at the beginning, which I don't know why they put it at the very beginning. I don't. There's some things that need to be hit before we really understand that anyway. But we'll be going through some things. I won't be drawing in this particular lecture. I drew out the spinal cord, but my little board, it can be very hard for me to draw that on there. Since I draw it in the lab, I'm not going to draw it on the lecture this time. Just to save some, not only save some time, but really it's just very difficult. That I just have a little board that I can draw on for the lectures. So I wish I could do this at the office or something, but they're working on our building. Our building's been worked on all semester, so I have to record at home. So anyway, I'm back to it. So let's look into it. So let's kind of get started and talk about our central nervous system again. Remind ourselves, central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. We know that. Very good. Okay. Now, CNS, brain and spinal cord, there's gray matter and there's white matter. Now, one of the big things we've already talked about is gray matter, white matter. What makes it different? We talk about how there's myelin and things like that. But what is it functionally? Gray matter is integration areas. Integration is where information is processed. Okay. White matter is transfer areas. That's where information is moved up and down. Okay. Now, gray matter, this is where we're going to have our nuclei. Nuclei, that is what a nucleus is. When we use the word nuclei in the world of neuroanatomy, we always are talking about that this is a collection of neuron cell bodies in the central nervous system. A ganglia is a collection of neuron cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. Okay? Nucleus, a nuclei, is a collection of neuron cell bodies in the central nervous system. Very important that we make that distinction in neuroanatomy. Now, in gray matter, this is going to be mostly cell bodies because these cell bodies are a huge component of that. That's where they reside. There's going to be some glial cells, different glia, and any axons that are present are unmyelinated axons. Okay, so the axons that are there are unmyelinated. Now, in the brain, this is really two places. I really want to add this later on. For future classes. I talk about it in lab. I want it here, but the book didn't discuss it here. But I really think it's important to discuss it in that way, is that there is the superficial layer of the cerebral cortex, but also in what is called the basal nuclei is another place in the brain that you'll find it. Though I talk about it later, I don't talk about it in this chapter because we're focusing mostly on spinal cord. And I know that's what this chapter really focuses on, but I do want to mention it. I'm just going to go ahead and mention it right here. In the spinal cord, it's deeper. So one of the interesting things is in the brain, you have superficial gray matter. In the spinal cord, we have deep gray matter in the gray horns. There is white matter areas, and they are transfer areas as we've seen. They are going to be axons and glial cells, no cell bodies, and these axons are myelinated. Very important. All right. Now, they can have tracts, which are bundles of axons. And then if I got bundles of similar tracts, I've got what's called a column, like a posterior white column, the anterior white column, the lateral white column. These have tracts in it, okay? Fasciculi, fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracilis, things like that, okay? Now, so just a big picture science time is our brain and spinal cord both receive sensory information, okay? In the brain and spinal cord, there are reflex centers where information is processed, integrated, and then motor output is sent from brain and spinal cord to visceral and somatic effectors. Okay, so very good. We got that big picture. Okay. Now, let's start with some gross anatomy of the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, we have some areas where it is visibly wider. There's more gray matter, and it's visibly wider. There's an enlargement, a cervical enlargement, and a lumbar or lumbosacral enlargement. Now, one of the things that I always like to test on is what vertebral level they are located. Your cervical enlargement starts at C4 to T1 vertebrae. This is where the brachial plexus nerves arise. Lumbosacral enlargement is where lumbar plexus and sacral plexus or lower nerves arise. It comes between T9, T12, which can make this difficult. This is a little bit annoying. It's called the lumbar enlargement or lumbosacral enlargement, yet it is found at T9 to T12, nowhere in the lumbar. Okay, very annoying. All right. Now, at the very end of the spinal cord, we're going to find the conus medullaris at the bit end of the spinal cord before we go to the cauda equina. It's a tapered conical part of the spinal cord. It goes down. It starts it ends right there at the vertebral disc, the intervertebral disc. That's between L1 and L2. Okay, that's where anatomically you will find it ending. The cauda equina are spinal nerves that look like a horse's tail. Cauda, tail, equina, horse, horse's tail. They are spinal nerves that extend downwards or inferiorly through the vertebral column, vertebral canal, that go down, and they're wispy, so they look like a tail of a horse. And you can see them right here, cauda equina going down. The filum terminale is non-neural, but it is part of pia mater, okay? It's non-neural. It's not neural tissue. It's one of your meninges, and it goes from the conus medullaris down to the coccyx, mostly pia. Central canal is at the center of the spinal cord. It's going to be found right there in the gray commissure, right in the middle of the gray commissure, where there's a gray commissure in the front, gray commissure in the back. It's filled with CSF. There's an anterior median fissure, a deeper, wide groove on the anterior front, the front or anterior surface of the spinal cord. The posterior median sulcus is a more shallow groove. It's on the back or posterior surface of the spinal cord. There are roots, and these roots, there's a posterior root, sometimes also called dorsal root. One of the things, now when I was a student, we called it the dorsal root. We had the dorsal root ganglion and the ventral root. We also sometimes call the dorsal root the posterior root and the ventral root the anterior root. So because we do that, we call, instead of the dorsal root ganglion, we call it the spinal ganglion. And we've updated some of the names. This is just becoming more in play, more common in practice. Okay, posterior or dorsal root is going to have your sensory neurons in it, axons of sensory neurons. The dorsal root ganglia holds the cell body of those particular sensory neurons. The ventral root, it's going to hold motor neurons. Kind of think about when you rev a motor, vroom, vroom, vroom. When you rev a motor, ventral root or anterior root, but I like ventral root because it makes me think vroom, vroom, the anterior root. Now, when the dorsal root and the ventral root unite, like the two branches off the letter Y to the base of the letter Y, when they come together, there is a spinal nerve made. Now, spinal nerves, if we know that the dorsal root and the ventral root dorsal root has sensory neurons in it, and the ventral root, it has motor neurons in it, that the spinal nerve will be a mix of both sensory and motor information because it is got both roots. We call spinal nerves mixed nerves because they contain both of those things, okay? Now, spinal nerves, they are named numbered. And when we name and number them, we use the vertebrae that they're associated with to name and number them. Now, there's a really kind of annoying thing we do here. In the cervical spine, we take the vertebrae because there is the skull. C1 is under the skull, but above C1 vertebrae. So the nerve roots, the spinal nerves, are named and numbered in the cervical region by the vertebrae they're above. Okay, so C1 root or C1 nerve is above C1 vertebrae. C2 nerve is above C2 vertebrae. Everywhere else, they're numbered for the vertebrae they're below. Okay. Now, there is 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral. And then there's the coccyx. So what happens is there's an odd man out. There's this one weird cervical we call C8 because for some reason in the neck, we number them for the vertebrae they're above. Everywhere else, the vertebrae they're below. There's an odd man out. We call that odd man out C8. Okay. Now, when these nerves come out, they branch and form different rami. There's a dorsal ramus, a ventral ramus, and a rami communicantes. The dorsal ramus is somatic motor and visceral motor neurons. They control the skin and skeletal muscles of our back. The ventral ramus contains somatic motor neurons that control the body wall and limbs. These are the roots of the various nerve plexuses that we'll learn in the next lecture. There's the rami communicantes. The rami communicantes have a white and gray ramus. Now, what I always like to say when I talk about the white and gray ramus is I basically say it's like your laundry. Your laundry goes in the dryer white and comes out gray. Okay? Preganglionic white ramus is how we enter the ganglia. Postganglionic gray ramus is how we exit the ganglia. You come in white and leave gray like your laundry. Okay? Okay, I hope that helps you understand it. Now, the meninges. Brain and spinal cord both have meninges. Spinal cord and brain both have meninges. Meninges is what surrounds the spinal cord, what surrounds the brain, and there's 3 layers of meninges. There's the dura, the arachnoid, and the pia. The dura mater, sorry if you can hear my dogs in the background. I have my noise-canceling headset on, but it may not get, so I apologize. I didn't have to say anything, but in case you heard it. Okay, the dura mater is our outer layer. Our middle layer is our arachnoid mater, and our pia mater is the innermost. Now, DAP, DAP, outside in. Dura is the outer. Now, dura, durable, tough. It means tough mother. It's tough, it's white, it's dense, it's fibrous. It's the outer layer. Okay? Now, it's got 2 layers. An endosteal layer, sometimes called periosteal layer because it fuses to the periosteum. Then the meningeal layer is underneath that, and the meningeal layer is going to be the innermost layer. You can see right here. Meningeal layer, endosteal layer, periosteal layer. Okay. Now, upon the dura, there is a space called the epidural space. An epidural in the vertebrae is the space between vertebrae and the dura, superficial to the dura. This is where epidura is given. An epidural is given when we stick a needle in there. I always talk about the epidural when we do this. It's an area. The subdural space separates the dura from the arachnoid mater. The arachnoid mater, which is middle, this covers our blood vessels. This contains what's called arachnoid trabeculae. Arachnoid mater means spider mother. Why is it called spider mother? When we look at it right here, our arachnoid mater right here, we see it's got all these arachnoid trabeculae in it. And this makes it look like spider webs. Okay? Okay. The arachnoid mater and things like that. Now, it's arachnoid trabeculae, these thin, delicate collagen and elastic fibers. There's a subarachnoid space under that. That's that space right inside of here, and that's going to hold your CSF. Then there's the pia mater, who's innermost. Pia means tender mother. A tender mother keeps you close. That is our closest to the firmly bound in the neural tissue. It's a meshwork of elastic and collagen fibers, surrounds our blood vessels in the brain, firmly bound to our underlying neural tissue. So it's actually right on the neural tissue, keeps it close like a tender mother. Okay. Now, gray matter, these are aggregations. These are neuroglia. These are cell bodies, and the axons that are present are unmyelinated. Why is it gray? Because the Nissl bodies. The Nissl bodies gives us our gray color. Okay, Nissl bodies or Nissl bodies. This is where we make many of our neurotransmitters, especially our peptide-based neurotransmitters. Okay, Our now white matter. These are myelinated axons. Okay, the white matter gives it the white. The white color comes from the myelin, gives white matter its name. Okay. Okay. Now there's gray horns. There's anterior, posterior, lateral gray horn. The anterior gray horn is actually the anterior bit of the gray matter. Posterior region of gray matter is posterior gray horn, and the lateral one is intermediate between it. Now, one of the big things that I want to make a point of is you will not see this. You will only see it in thoracic and lumbar. You will not see this in the cervical spine, in the sacral spine. It's only going to be in thoracic and lumbar, thoracolumbar, okay, thoracic and lumbar region. We're going to talk about that in AP2. That's where the sympathetic nerves come out. Okay, gray commissure. This connects the gray matter left and right. A commissure connects left and right. We talk about what's called in neurons. There's commissural fibers that connect left and right. Okay, now it integrates. Gray matter's integration. It makes sense of things. It collects information, makes sense of it. Okay, so we have nuclei. Nuclei, that is neuron cell bodies in the CNS. There are sensory nuclei in the spinal cord. There's motor nuclei in the spinal cord. They are located in your gray horns. The posterior gray horn has sensory nuclei only, but there's two parts to it. There's a more anterior part and a more posterior part. The posterior part of the posterior gray horn has somatic sensory. The anterior part of the posterior gray horn has visceral sensory, but only sensory are in the posterior gray horn. Lateral and anterior gray horn have motor nuclei. Lateral contains visceral motor. Another word for this is autonomic. That's why it is found only in thoracic and lumbar region. The anterior gray horn is called somatic motor. Okay, right here you can see that. Okay, sensory, somatic, visceral, visceral, somatic, motor. Okay. Now, I need to put that right here. I think I need to take this picture right here and put it in there, or put it right after it. One of the two. I need to get this picture on there just to really make some points. Okay, we have our gray horns, okay, and our gray commissure. Now there's anterior white column, lateral white column, and posterior white column. The anterior white column is the anterior region of the spinal cord. Anterior white column, it lies between the anterior median fissure and the anterior gray horn. Posterior white column is between the posterior gray horn and the anterior gray horn. Posterior white column between the posterior gray horn and here. Okay. White commissure here. Those will be white commissures. Okay. All right. Here's a good picture of all the spinal cord stuff so you guys can see it. Okay. Now we're about done with the first lecture. It doesn't take me very long to get through this one, but it's about tracts or fasciculi. Tracts are bundles of axons. One of the cool things about them is they're carrying the same information in the same direction. It's either going to go up or it's going to go down. Okay, it could be ascending tracts that carries information up. That'd be sensory. It could be descending tracts that carries information down or motor. Okay. Now spinal nerves. They're going to be surrounded by 3 layers of connective tissue. Okay, now the segmented spinal nerves, they're going to have the 3 connective tissue layers. There's going to be an epineurium around the outside, the outermost, surrounds the whole spinal nerve. There's a perineurium that surrounds the nerve fascicles, and the endoneurium that surrounds the axons. Think about the epimysium, endomysium, perimysium, all that we learned in muscle tissue. We learned epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. Very similar. Epineurium around the nerve, perineurium around the fascicle, endoneurium around the axon, which is part of the cell. Dermatomes is something I want to think about. Now, we talk about dermatomes. These are clinically quite important. They are a bilateral region of skin. What do we mean by bilateral? We mean it's on both sides of the body. There's one on the left, one on the right, bilateral. It's a region of skin monitored by a single pair of nerves. These can be cranial nerves, or these can be spinal nerves. Cranial nerve, for example, number 5, does this aspect of the face. Spinal nerve CN to CN2 to CN3 does the back of the head. Okay. This is a map of the region of skin monitored by those nerves on the front and on the back. A loss to function of these is called a neuropathy. Okay. Now, if we look at peripheral for motor commands, we're going to see the ventral rami. Ventral rami have somatic motor and visceral motor neurons. These are going to be the roots of plexus. They control the body, wall, and limbs. Dorsal ramus, that is the somatic motor and visceral motor neurons. They control the skeletal muscles of the back and the skin of the back. Now, that's motor. Sensory-wise, the dorsal ramus takes sensory information from the skin and muscles of the back. Ventral ramus does sensory information about the body surface, body wall, and limbs. And there is a nerve called a sympathetic nerve that carries sensory information from your visceral organs. Okay. What I'm going to do is end right here, and I'm going to end on this slide. So I got one now. Spinal nerves, they are what connects the tracts of the spinal cord with our body. There are 31 pairs. Okay. 31 pairs of spinal nerves that we have, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, 31 pairs of spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs, and there's different numbers in different regions. There's 8 in the cervical, 12 in the thoracic, 5 in the lumbar, 5 in the sacral, and 1 in the coccyx. 8, 12, 5, 5, 1. Okay, from top to bottom. 8, 12, 5, 5, 1. Okay, sounds like a number you might dial. 8, 12, 5, 5, 1. Okay. Now, let's talk about nerve plexuses. I want to set the stage for nerve plexuses, and then I'm going to stop, okay? The ventral rami, one of the interesting things about all the ventral rami, with exceptions of T2 through T11. T2 through T11 go between the ribs. They intercostal nerves. They're just right between the ribs. They go straight to the things they control. All the other nerves, all the other ventral rami of the spinal nerves, every other one, they like to join together and branch and join and branch and join and branch. And they form this complex network called a plexus. Now, the roots, that is your ventral rami. Roots, then you come to trunks, then you have divisions, cords, and the peripheral nerves. Rowdy truckers do coke periodically. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is pick up in the next lab or next lecture about these nerves and what plexus they're in and things like that. So we're going to stop here and pick up in the next one. Thank you, guys.